Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for another edition of our webinar series, Inside Immigration. Today, we are joined by panelists at Green and Spiegel, Hilete Stein and Emre Esensoy. Please feel free to ask any questions via the pop-up text bar on the right side of your screen, and we will do our best to address them all at the end. If the panelists do not get to your question, you can contact them through the information provided on the screen now. And with that being said, I will hand things over to our panelists.
Thanks, Danielle. All right, so we're going to start today just by going through an express entry update. I think that was some pretty exciting news this past month. So July 6th of this month, immigration resumed general express entry draws, which had been paused for quite some time. And since then, we've had 2 rounds of invitations. So we had a July 6th draw where 1,500 invitations were issued with a cutoff score of 557 points. And then another one 2 weeks later, July 20th, we had 1,750 invitations issued with a cutoff score of 542 points. So, you know, these cutoff scores were actually the highest that we have seen in any express entry general draw since 2015, so quite some time. And, you know, the reason for these high scores really is twofold. So as everyone knows, there was a pause on issuing invitations to apply for permanent residence through the express entry system. So we had no invitations issued under the federal skilled worker stream since December of 2020. And then the Canadian experience class was also paused from September of 2021. So during that time, we did see a growing candidate pool, which grew as IRCC was trying to deal with its backlog of applications. And then, you know, when draws did resume this month, the numbers of invitations were not quite as high as they had been prior to these pauses. So historically, we would see usually about 3,000 to 5,000 invitations issued in each round, and this time we were at about, you know, half that amount. So both of those things combined led to these kind of high CRS cutoff scores. You know, and a lot of clients are kind of reaching out now saying, well, what can we expect moving forward? So, you know, IRCC did indicate prior to the July 6th draw that it would be resuming draws gradually. And I think that we can expect, you know, that in the coming draws, there will be higher numbers of invitations with each round, maybe not, you know, dramatically higher, but we did see, you know, a slight jump from July 6th to the 20th. And then, you know, we can look at who is sitting in the pool right now and the spread of candidate scores to try and kind of get an idea of trends that we might see in the coming months. So when we look at who's in the pool as of July 18th, there were 9,681 candidates in the pool who had CRS scores above 500 points. Of these, you know, 1,750 were invited to apply for permanent residence on July 20th. So roughly, we think there's probably about 8,000 right now in the pool with CRS scores above 500. You know, if we assume that draws will continue every 2 weeks, as IRCC has indicated, and the numbers remain, you know, somewhat stable, maybe going up a bit, candidates would likely need to have a CRS score above 500 points to get an invitation at least until probably end of September, early October. This is my tea leaf reading, if you will. So we, you know, as we know, surprises can happen, but if we're kind of trying to make an educated guess on what we might see, that's probably a good guess that you'll probably need to have above 500. After that, you know, it's possible we might see a decrease in the CRS cutoff scores. When we look at kind of below 500 points, you've got about 5,000 candidates sitting in the pool right now with a CRS score between 491 points and 500. 8,857 with scores between 481 and 490. And then quite a jump, so 18,642 are in the pool right now with scores between 471 and 480. So, you know, by the end of this year, if you're in the high 400s, maybe you might get an invitation. If you're below that, I'd say it's probably unlikely without a provincial nomination to boost your score up. You know, I get asked all the time from clients, well, what do I have to do to get my score above 500? What does a candidate profile look like to get my score above 500? For candidates who are outside of Canada, it's very, very difficult to get your score that high if you don't have any Canadian work experience and you don't have a job offer in Canada. I'd say almost impossible to get yourself into the 500s. Unless, you know, if you're under 30 years old, you're fluent in both French and English, you have a master's degree or higher, and at least 3 years of skilled work experience, then you might be in that 500 score range. But anything less than that, you wouldn't be able to hit it. For candidates who are inside of Canada, though, you know, it's a bit easier to reach that target. So you still have to be, you know, for example, under or close to 30 years old, fluent in English, you know, a master's or 2 post-secondary degrees, 1 year of Canadian skilled work experience, 3 years of foreign skilled work experience. That's the type of profile of somebody who might be in that 500 score range. You know, that same person, if they had a bachelor degree instead of a master's, their CRS score would fall below 500 points. And if you're in your mid-30s or older, forget it. You need either a permanent job offer in Canada or, you know, maybe some bilingual language abilities in English and French to bring your score above 500 points. So, you know, for people outside of Canada, often we look at, you know, potentially bringing them in to get some experience on a work permit first, and then transition over to PR. You know, in terms of improving your score and your chances of receiving an invitation, really, you know, we're looking at provincial nomination options for candidates who are in the express entry system who don't have those super high scores. So we're always looking to see, is there a provincial express entry stream that this person might qualify for, where they can apply to boost their score, although, you know, some of those streams do require an invitation. We look at, you know, can this person get a qualifying job offer to boost their score? And of course, you know, maximizing language test results for the applicant and their spouse is always encouraged. So if you have room for improvement, we recommend, you know, trying to maximize your score to bring it up as much as possible. In terms of provincial nominations, so we'll do a little Ontario update. Ontario this month did receive its 2022 nomination allocation from the federal government. And this year they have 9,750 nominations to issue, which is actually an increase from last year's allocation, which was 8,350 plus a 250 for foreign workers who were in NOC occupations. So of the 2022 9,750 allocation, about 50% have been issued so far. So, you know, that makes sense because we're kind of halfway through the year, and the rest will likely spread throughout the rest of this year. This month, we haven't seen too many invitations issued by Ontario. So we had 2 draws, one under the Express Entry Skilled Trade stream, which issued 755 invitations to candidates who had scores of 310, CRS scores of 310 and up, with work experience in specific occupations. So just because you met the stream criteria and were sitting in the pool with a CRS score of 310 didn't necessarily mean you got an invitation. You had to have work experience in the specified occupations for that round. And then Ontario's entrepreneur stream also issued 33 invitations, very large number, to candidates who had scores between 146 and 174. And that was it for activity this month. The end of last month was a little more active, so we did see invitations issued under various streams. So we had the employer job offer international student stream, master's and PhD streams saw invitations, in demand skills, And the employer job offer foreign worker stream did have a draw that targeted specifically candidates under the Economic Mobility Pathways Project. Excuse me. We also saw this month with Ontario that processing times did increase. So it's now up to 3 to 4 months to get a nomination issued, as opposed to 2 to 3 months, which it was sort of for a while prior to this. Excuse me. All right, we can move on. I guess, Emre, do you want to touch on super visas, and then we'll jump back to the COVID-19 travel update?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Let's talk about super visas. Just to give some context for people who may not be familiar, super visas are multiple entry visitor visas that allow foreign nationals to visit their Canadian or Canadian permanent resident children and grandchildren and stay in Canada for a longer period of time than a regular visa or a visitor visa. Until recently, super visa holders could stay in Canada for up to 2 years. And a few weeks ago, on July 4th, IRCC increased this time period to 5 years. So now people who obtain super visas on or after July 4th will be eligible to stay in Canada for up to 5 years. So that's welcome news. Some people who had applied before July 4th may also benefit from this. So if their application was approved before July 4th, they're eligible for the 5-year stay as long as they enter after July 4th. And similarly, if the application is still in process, they'll also be eligible for a stay of up to 5 years at a time. And for people, so the super visa holders who have already entered Canada before July 4th, their period of stay that was granted to them when they came to Canada remains the same. So if you've got 2 years when you came in, then it's still 2 years. They may leave Canada before their status expires and then re-enter, and then they may be granted a stay of up to 5 years if they're still eligible for a super visa, or they can file an extension from within Canada and be approved, but then that would again only be for another 2 years. So it really depends on when you've applied and when you have arrived in Canada, and everything else remains the same for the super visa. So the eligibility requirements are still the same. It's just the period of stay has been extended to 5 years.
Yeah, and it's a good option for people who may not have gotten an invitation under the parent grandparent permanent sponsorship program. So it does allow people who are in Canada to bring over parents to stay for longer periods of time than they otherwise would have. So we know how competitive that parent grandparent sponsorship program has been.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it takes a very long time.
Yeah, you got to be lucky and win the lottery.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of COVID-19 travel updates, we did have an update July 19th. IRCC did resume mandatory random COVID testing for fully vaccinated air travelers. And this is for anyone arriving in one of the 4 major airports, so Vancouver, Calgary, Montreal, and Toronto. That it had been paused prior to that. And the purpose in resuming the COVID testing is basically twofold. One reason is to monitor levels of COVID-19 importation that is associated with international travel, and the other is to monitor for new variants of concern. So all COVID-19 testing now on arrivals has to be completed outside of the airports, and the test can either be done via an in-person appointment or a virtual appointment with a self-swab test where you log in and test yourself online in front of a nurse. If you are selected for random testing or you're not fully vaccinated and need testing, you get an email notification within 15 minutes of completing your customs declaration. And your email will contain information on how to arrange your test. The test does have to be completed by the next calendar day. And there is an exemption if you had COVID and you have a positive molecular test, so a PCR test, for example, that was completed between 10 and 180 days prior to your arrival in Canada, then you would be exempt from having to do the test if you are randomly selected. But of course, you do need to provide proof of that positive test that was completed. And if you're not fully vaccinated, you do still need to test on day 1 and 8 of your mandatory 14-day quarantine. If you do test positive on arrival, then you have to isolate for 10 days from the date of the test. And that's even if the isolation requirement is shorter in the province where you are, you still have to do the full 10 days of isolation. Aside from that, no changes with respect to ArriveCan, so you still have to input all of your information within 72 hours before your arrival in Canada. Okay, Emre, you want to go through IEC?
Sure. So this is a quick, simple update. Again, it's going to make life easier for people. IEC is short for International Experience Canada. It gives young people from certain countries, typically aged 18 to 35, but it depends on where people are from, the opportunity to travel and work in Canada for up to 2 years. One of the requirements to participate in the IEC is to have health insurance for the entire period that the person wants to work in Canada for. And IRCC has recently clarified that the participants can present 2 consecutive health insurance policies if they weren't able to buy one policy to cover the entire length of the work permit. Now they've clarified that they can buy, 2 that are back to back. And that's really that on the IEC front. I can continue with the postgraduate work permit. I feel like this is something that people are anxiously waiting for, and so are we. So again, for context, a postgraduate work permit is an open work permit, valid for up to 3 years, depends on the person's studies, that some international students may obtain after studying in Canada, except in very few limited cases, they cannot be extended. So often what postgraduate work permit holders do, like their immigration story is they'll apply for permanent residence through express entry after obtaining the required Canadian work experience. But as Hilete just talked about, there was a very long pause in the intake of express entry applications in the last couple of years. So starting from mid-September of last year, they didn't take in any applications under the express entry program. And they weren't restarted until a few weeks ago. So a lot of postgraduate work permit holders whose permits were about to expire found themselves in a bit of a sticky situation. So they may have fallen out of status or had to stop working and be here as visitors, or had to leave Canada altogether because, again, their status had expired. So in response to these growing concerns, IRCC first announced back in April that starting this summer, with former international students could extend their postgraduate work permits if they were to expire between January and December of this year. So they would be eligible to extend their permits by another 18 months. And then at the end of June, just last month, they also announced that these measures would be extended to all postgraduate work permit holders whose permits, again, have expired or are going to expire between September 20th of last year, so when they stopped the intake of express entry applications, and to December 31st, 2022, so this year. Again, the announcement was that this new policy would start in the summer of this year, which we're in the middle of right now. So we're anxiously waiting for the program to be open and to hear more details about the exact eligibility requirements. But so far, all we know is that postgrad work permit holders who have expired from September onwards will get to extend by 18 months. And as soon as we hear more about it, we'll obviously share that with our network. And Hilete, did you want to add anything on that, or should I?
No, it's just it does put some of our clients who are kind of expiring now or recently expired. It does put them in a tough position if they are working in Canada, because of course you can't apply for it before the program's opened to apply for the extension. So in order to extend your ability to continue working in Canada, you're basically looking at options to have an employer sponsor you and continue on a closed work permit rather than on an open postgraduate work permit. Or you may have to switch to a visitor status, in which case there will be a period of time where you're not permitted to work. So lots of students or graduates anxiously awaiting the news that was to come this summer, and hopefully they don't really have to wait till the end of the summer, but we'll see what happens. Stay tuned next month.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the takeaway here while we're waiting for this is to make sure that you maintain valid status if you're going to be here in Canada. Again, your options are either try and find another work permit category that is applicable to you. Most often it would be an employer-specific work permit, or at the very least, switch your status as into a visitor while we're waiting for this news to come. And so moving on to Ukraine, Canada has a program to assist Ukrainian nationals and their immediate family members to help them escape the war that's going on in that country. It's called the Canada-Ukraine Authorization for Emergency Travel. It's still open. It had started back in mid-March. And under this program, Ukrainian nationals and their spouses or common law partners, their young children, and their grandchildren may apply for temporary visas to visit, to work, or study in Canada for up to 3 years. Initially, the ambition for the program was to process these types of applications within 2 weeks. But there has been a very high demand for this program as well. So now we're kind of seeing 1 to 2 months of processing time, depending on where the applicant presently is. So if they are staying in countries that are neighboring Ukraine, where a lot of people have fled to, processing times may take longer than for those people who have applied from anywhere else in the world, essentially. In addition to the visa program, Canada also provides financial assistance to Ukrainian nationals and their families coming under the same program. So they have started providing a one-time non-taxable benefit of up to $3,000 per adult and $1,500 per child that have come to Canada under the Canada-Ukraine program. They can apply for it after they arrive in Canada. There's an online application system for it, and they'll have to open a Canadian bank account as well. So yeah, the supports are definitely there. There are also provincial settlement supports for, again, Ukrainian nationals fleeing the war. It depends, it changes from province to province. So for example, in Ontario, the provincial government is providing OHIP, so Ontario healthcare insurance for people who have come under the emergency travel program. And that's about it. Should we answer some questions?
Sure, we can turn it over. If anybody has any questions, you can put in. I can take one that I see now. Is the sponsorship category open? So no, it's not currently open, and we don't have any information as to when it will be open. And you know, for that reason, the super visa that we talked about today is a really good option. In the past, when it has opened, it's been basically a lottery system where you put in an expression of interest. If you would like to sponsor your parents or grandparents and meet the criteria, and then IRCC would randomly invite you know, a specified number of people within the pool to apply to sponsor their parents. So it's totally random. There is very significant demand for the program when it does open. So, you know, just because you put in an expression of interest does not necessarily mean that you will get an invitation. But if you are lucky enough, then it's a great option to bring your parents here permanently. And if not, then the super visa is now also a good option if you'd like your parents to stay long term. Of course, you know, that comes with having to maintain their health insurance privately as well. That's all I see right now. Will the CRS score go down to 470 onwards in a few months? I wish I knew. I wish I had a crystal ball that would tell me. But you know, the way it's looking now, again, if we look at the analysis of numbers, because we have, you know, quite a few applicants in the pool in that 470 or 471 to 480 range. We've got, you know, over or close to 19,000 right now in the pool in that range, and several thousand higher than that. It really depends on what happens with IRCC's numbers and how many candidates they decide to invite. You know, if we see the trends continue every 2 weeks with roughly the same number of invitations being issued in each round, then I'd say it's pretty unlikely to get invited with a 470 this year. But you never know. Again, we've been surprised in the past. We did have a draw, you know, where all of a sudden IRCC invited candidates with scores of 75 points and up. And that was unprecedented in the history of express entry. So I would never say never, but if we look at the trends, it's probably unlikely without a provincial nomination. All right. I don't see any other questions coming through. So Danielle, I guess we can turn it over to you.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So that's all the time we have for today. I'd really like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar, and a special thanks to Hilete and Emre. If you would like to discuss today's topics in more detail, please reach out to book a consultation. Details can be found on the screen now. And I encourage you all to sign up for e-alerts and follow us on social media to keep up to date with the latest developments inside Canadian immigration. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.